Alright, welcome ladies and gentlemen. We are up with our Meta Musings again. We took about a 2-week break, but we are back. I'm ZeroCardinality here with Sotere. Hey Sotere, how you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. The break was entirely your fault.
It was my
For all
fault.
the viewers out there.
I went on a little vacation, went over to quite a lot of places actually. Went over to Grand Canyon and visited Vegas on the way back. So I just came back from Vegas. And
You been?
a little bit, about $20. So
Huh?
I mean, so the thing is, I am a PhD student in statistics. So I don't know what that says about me when I know that the odds are against me and yet I play anyway. So
Well, here are my thoughts. The odds are against you in the long run, so you may as well put all your money in at once.
well, well, I mean, no, my thought was as long as I have fun doing it, it's worth losing a little money to have some fun. It's kind of like paying for entertainment in a way.
Yeah,
But
that's the point. The other way to do it is play the nickel slots and get drinks the whole time. And the best way to do that is sit on the corner so you know that the waitresses have to pass you by, and then you kind of have to be aggressive because they will try to ignore you because you're playing on the nickel slots, but you have to be like, hey, how you doing? Give me a drink.
no,
Gin and tonic.
once
Por
I
favor.
was waiting for my friends for breakfast actually. So I just sat down at like this penny video poker thing, and I played for a little while. And my friends came, so I'm like, all right, it was just like $1. I put in $1, so I just bet everything, and I won. So I'm like, all right, so I bet everything again, and I won again. So like I ended up like being up $5 from putting in $1. Just from waiting for my friends, so that worked out, worked out pretty well. But anyway, getting back to the normal, what we're supposed to be talking about on our show, Meta Musings. We start out with an unconventional support, and usually you can tell which one it is by the picture I have up on the screen for you. And today it is Jarvan. So, Sochi, can you start us off with what is good about a support Jarvan?
I will start us off with the backstory of Jarvan, and then maybe I'll let you take it from there.
All right.
Jarvan, upon his release, had kind of ridiculous base stats, so whether you played him top or in the jungle or as a support in bottom lane, he was overpowered in all of these positions. You could just get a heart of gold on him and really go to town. Since then he's been nerfed quite a bit, but he's still one of the choice selections for a kill lane bottom. What he brings to the table is primarily some pretty good CC. He also brings a buff to his team, and more CC with Cataclysm to really keep people in one place for potential AoE teamfight compositions. So he has all these things going for him. He also has a good passive that allows him to do a little damage early on in the lane without building too many items. I guess kind of the weakness of him is the fact that he doesn't really he needs those items to scale, and mainly he needs those items to survive, I guess is the key.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess Soter went over the basics, but he has that little attack speed boost. He has some good CC with his knockup, and he has that Cataclysm, which in a team fight can actually provide great peel / protecting your carry, because really it's just providing a barrier that opponents have to go through. And if, say, you have an Olaf running at you, and he's using that ultimate to prevent any stuns or slows, if he puts down that Cataclysm, he can't walk through that wall, so it'll really help your AD carry stay away from that Olaf. So against certain champions, it can really work well in terms of protecting your AD carry. But as Sotir said, really needs those items. Does get some help from the health that support items give, but in general is not going to get as much of that tankiness as he needs for that late game.
Yeah, I feel kind of similarly with support, the idea of support Jarvan as I do with jungle Jarvan, in the sense that he kind of needs an early lead to get a couple of core items before he's going to be very effective in these team fights, because he can peel alright, but it really depends on who he's peeling against, because Cataclysm is great against a lot of people, but other people can just roll out of it, dash out of it, jump over it. I think Jace can just run through it because that's the nature of the Cataclysm wall. That it, I believe, acts like essentially minion collision, where if you ignore minion collision and other things like that, you have the potential just to go straight through it. So there are some issues with Jarvan, but overall he has a pretty good skill set and certainly is a viable choice for that bottom lane. Does have a little CC, a little bit of a bonus to add to his team that can really help them out as it, in the early game in the lane, because that's, another thing I don't think we focused on enough is the fact that, he's probably going to out-trade most standard supports down in bottom lane. And the other great thing is if you're going to run him in a kill lane, as we mentioned earlier, that's where we've seen him in competitive play. Kill lanes, generally, Jarvan, Leona, is the big one, but it's good because he has a really long range from which he can engage and can really get on top of people and stick on top of them and allow another melee champion to catch up there as well. I've also seen combinations like Jarvan Lee Sin works out pretty good too.
Yeah, and basically he has the two things that you want in a kill lane. He has a gap closer and he has CC, so he can gap close and he can knock them up. So really a good choice for a kill lane. And again, Goose popularized, or now MTWNA, although they've really been broken up now with Atlanta leaving MTWNA, but they popularized that kill lane with Jarvan Leona. And though Leona was the support in that combination that they use, you can still have Jarvan as a support if you have something like, say, a Lee Sin Jarvan kill lane. So good choice if you want to run a kill lane and you want to have somebody as the support. And yeah, one thing to mention though is that he is a melee champion, and as we have talked about before on this show, melee supports suffer a little bit compared to ranged supports.
Yeah, they absolutely do, because, just the fact that they have to get in there and the fact that they're not going to have very many items. I mean, you get into 20 minutes in, you probably only have, unfortunately, 2 GP10 items. That certainly slows you down, makes you not want to get into the battle there. But that being said, there's a lot of standard supports that are good at what they do. Taric, Leona, Blitzcrank, that also have that same, dysfunction, so to speak, but they're still viable.
Yep, so, I guess an interesting choice for support, although I think he's one of the ones that you can really see how his support can work, because he has a lot of things you would want in a support. He has CC, he has the ability to peel for his AD carry, and he has an attack speed boost. Even though it's not as good as, say, Nunu's, he still has that boost for his AD carry. So, it provides great lane presence and can provide good teamfight presence as long as you don't, put your Cataclysm such that your AD carry stuck in with their enemy bruiser or something like that. Just make sure you place it right. But
yeah, you can also kill your team pretty easily with Cataclysm. One of the more fun things to do, but you have to be careful about that. I think we've probably kind of exhausted Jarvan. We'll come back with a new unusual support next week as well. Now, at this point, we get into our kind of meta musings where we talk about how to break the meta in successful fashions, but I kind of wanted to, if you would indulge me, Brian, discuss why we have the regular meta, why people think that's the best. Because I actually got asked a question, and it was supposed to go to the Trinity Force podcast, but the only person they could get in touch with was me, and so they asked me questions through email, and I was like, from a new player, I guess a lot of this doesn't make a lot of sense, so here is what it is. So, will you allow me, Brian?
Yes, I guess this is like our little, kind of like our mailbag section. I think we were discussing introducing a mailbag section, but yeah, this is just a question that a viewer asked. Although I guess not a viewer of this show, just a different show or something. But
they're going to be a viewer of this show. Don't worry.
All right. So here's our mini mailbag for today.
Our mini mailbag, and yeah, certainly. I guess you'll have to do an outtake or a send out at the end of the show where people can ask us questions, because that would be fun. If anyone has any questions, we would love to answer them. If anyone's like, oh, that was dumb, that's a stupid idea, Jarvan support, then we'll defend it, whatnot. Anyway, so Danny, who is also NL Demo, wanted to know, why the meta is why it is. And, they had a couple of guesses. They were right on most accounts. Generally you send the AP middle, and he was kind of worried. He was confused. He's like, do you send AP middle because they get minions just a little bit faster than the other lanes? And they do get minions a little bit faster than the other lanes, but the main reason you send APs in the middle is, one, there's not as long of a distance to escape back to tower range, so they're a little bit safer there than they would be in top lane, for instance. 2, they're close to blue buff. And 3, they have really, they tend to ramp up with levels at level 6, at level 11, at level 16. So you want them to get that early levels, but you also want them to be able to roam bottom, top, and have control, be present in the jungle for the early game, because that's when they're going to have a lot of bursts and be more effective than, the bruisers and AD carries and so on and so forth. Top lane is generally a 1v1, and we'll get into that later, but what do you want out of a top lane? You want someone who's sturdy, who can win those 1v1 battles, but also who has some mobility to escape any sort of gank. So, sturdiness, escapability, hopefully sustainability to stay in lane, be able to farm up, and then have good late game presence. And then bottom lane is generally the 2v2, and the reason it has become the 2v2 over time is because Dragon is down there, so you want 2 people down there for greater Dragon control. Whereas if it gets to a point in a game, it gets like 10, 15 minutes in especially, and you have a 2v1 bottom lane, well, suddenly the person with the 1 is at a very distinct disadvantage because they're not going to be able to go and defend a dragon. Suddenly it'll be a 4v3 at dragon, and you might have to give that up. So that's kind of the the standard setup. That is why everything is that way. But certainly even pro teams have swapped that up. A lot of them we're seeing swap lanes. 2 people will go top, and generally you'll have your AD carry and your support go top. If you feel like they picked a very aggressive top laner, and you have someone who can farm safer, but not necessarily is going to win those trades, so then you'll try to zone them out as much as possible as the 2v1, and likewise they'll try to zone your bruiser, your soloer out as well. So that's kind of how the meta has set up. It's been pretty standard all throughout. I haven't really discussed the jungle. Generally, jungle is a utility jungler in these days. You buy 2 GP10s, you just bring to the team what you can, and you have to realize you're probably going to have about half as much farm as a lot of the solo laners, but you're going to try to make that up with buying those GP10 items. So you should only be a couple thousand gold down in an ideal situation. I mean, I guess ideally you would want to have as much or more gold than them, but in a realistically ideal situation, you'll only be a couple thousand gold down because you'll be, at the time they get about 200 CS in their lanes, you should be at about, 80 to 100 CS in the jungle, but you should also be having, 2 GP10s to really supplement your income.
As well as the assist that you might get from ganking lanes.
Right.
So yeah, I mean I think Sotere did a pretty good job of breaking down the meta. Is that all that you wanted to go over for the meta? The current general most common meta right now?
Yeah, I think that covers the main basics. Why do people go into their lanes? The one thing I didn't mention is, you tend to send an AD carry with the support bottom because they tend to have the weaker early games, and you want them to be as safe as possible. You want mid lane to get the levels, but you really want the AD carries to get as much farm as possible. You want them to rack up all the gold because they scale more so with farm than they do with levels. They want to get their items, that Infinity Edge, that Trinity Force, that Phantom Dancer, so on and so forth, really bulks them up and allows them to do the most damage late game, but in the middle game they're certainly susceptible to the burst of AP carries, and generally bruisers will win those one-on-one matchups with them as well, and that's why you send them bottom, give them a little bit of support, and just allow them to farm. We are seeing a lot more aggression to bottom lane, so not only do you have to have an AD carry that can farm and you are protecting them, but aggressive bottom lanes have become more and more frequent because heal has been nerfed, Blitzcrank got a little bit of a buff, Taric got a buff. So not only do you have to have someone who can farm, someone who's going to scale really well into late game, but also someone who's going to trade well in the lane and has good level 6 burst. I think that's actually very, very essential in the game nowadays, just because Corki, Graves, and Ezreal all have incredible burst, where if you don't build, a couple Doran's Blades or an early Phage, you are really at risk of getting burst down as soon as you hit level 6, because they all kind of have like almost AP caster level burst once they hit 6. Almost. It's not quite there, but they certainly do have a surprising amount of burst, considering that you generally think of these champions as auto attack champions.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you have somebody like Taric, they are going to have the burst to 100 to 0 somebody, because if the Taric gets a stun off you, gets that shatter, gets that ultimate, and then the AD carries use their entire combo, I mean that's a lot of burst that they have. So just they do have a lot of burst. But going on to the main part of the show, we want to talk about. I guess this does deal with what you mentioned about the question, because we're really trying to change that kind of meta right now. And what we are going to discuss is an all AD team. And that's really just, Sotir mentioned, you generally send that AP mid, but, why do you need to send an AP mid? Well, you want the levels and all that stuff, but what if you had a team that was composed of all AD damage? Usually teams don't like doing that because, the opposition can just build armor and build stuff like Randuin's Omen and Frozen Heart to, negate a lot of damage that this all AD team might do. But, I think we really looked at what we could do, and I think we came to the conclusion that an all AD team could actually work.
Yeah, well, I think the thought was, I've seen this happen a lot, and you mentioned later on an all AP team. What does tend to happen is, of course, any sort of armor or magic resist, we'll just talk about the AD team, so any sort of armor that the opposing team is going to get is going to be very, very effective against your entire team. And so, of course, you don't want that. You don't want them to, be able to buy just one type of defensive, stat and be really safe from the rest of your team, get a really nice reduction to all the damage. But there's a couple things going for a team that can go all AD. One, they tend to have really good late games. They can run an earlier Last Whisper, but they can also run an early Zeke's Herald. They can synergize with their team to an extent that it really helps them out, and it gives the other team this really big dilemma where so many people don't want to rush an early Chainmail Vest. The AD carry doesn't want to do it. The support's not going to have money to do it because they need to buy their GP10s. The AP carry probably doesn't want to do it unless they're a Morgana or someone who's kind of relying on their base numbers and wants to get an early Zonias. And even bruisers in general. Nowadays, bruisers tend to get a couple items before they get their defensive items. For instance, Aurelion will rush Trinity Force or Wit's End, and sometimes both of those, and then go into a Guardian's Angel. But not too many people tend to build very, very early armor, and so that's kind of why I was thinking, we could probably, see this sort of team composition have good success in nowadays game.
Yeah, and okay, so what kind of team would work well? You really want a team that synergizes well because, it has the potential to. So, for example, we have the picture of Jarvan up there, so might as well use him as an example. He has the ability to increase the team's attack speed, the entire team's attack speed, and usually that doesn't help out champions like the AP carry, sorry. But you don't have an AP carry. Instead, you have another AD champion, so they're going to be benefiting from that as well. If you have champions like Ezreal, who has that Essence Flux that can increase the attack speed of his entire team, you can have a champion like Gangplank, who can increase the movement speed and the damage of his entire team. And that's really going to help out the entire team instead of only helping out a couple champions if you have a traditional team composition.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this from Dignitas, where even professional teams don't really look and see how everything's synergized, and we've talked about it with our all-attack speed composition. Dignitas did it with, the Gangplank support to help out a Jarv or a Katarina and a Jax in addition to their AD carry. Like, everyone was benefiting from that extra AD bonus, and we're kind of going at the same angle here, where we're hoping to, pick champions that are going to be viable yet give each other buffs, and just the fact that they're going to be all AD is part and parcel to the strategy, but we're trying to see if we can overcome the weaknesses. Now, the weaknesses are, of course, not very much magic damage. How do you combat that? Well, right off the bat, there's a lot of AD carries and AD champions that actually do a good amount of magic damage. Ezreal, for instance, Corki, they do, appreciable amounts of magic damage. Now, you don't really need to build magic resistance against them. You can build life instead and still probably be okay. But just because we're going to have a AD-focused team doesn't mean there's going to be absolutely no AP damage. And I was in a game today where, I kind of wanted to play Yorick middle. I think is a great middle. We had a Malphite top, and the team was like, oh, you have no AP damage. You have to realize, even if you don't necessarily get a lot of damage from ability power, there's still a lot of champions that do decent amounts of base magic damage, including Yorick, including Malphite. Now, they're not going to be part of our teams because they're not, very AD-based. I guess Yorick arguably is, and probably would benefit from a lot lot of the bonuses that we could give him on a team, but he does do pretty good amounts of magic damage and doesn't really get up and into the battle to use his attack speed too much.
Yeah. So, I mean, and really the things you have to worry about are Frozen Heart and Randuin's Omen, because
Right.
those are the items that people typically get. And you want to ban out Malphite or something like that, because Malphite could really ruin your team. But really, the two things you really have to worry about the enemy team building is Frozen Heart and Randuin's Omen, and they are, if you run an all AD team, they are for sure going to run those items. Maybe not the Randuin's Omen, but definitely the Frozen Heart, because those are so good. I mean, Randuin's Omen takes a bit of a while to build up, and it's not as common of an item, I don't think, as Frozen Heart. But really, they are going to build those items. But how can you combat that? I think Sotere mentioned this already, but an early Zeke's Herald can be huge for your team, because your entire team is going to be benefiting from the attack speed and the lifesteal from it. So that is going to be helping your entire team. And the fact that your team synergizes with, I already mentioned Ezreal. Another AD carry that you can run is Sivir, who has that ultimate to increase the attack speed of the entire team. I really like Tarek as the support, because he does offer that ultimate, which does give attack damage, but he also gives AP, so it's not like it's focused for one side. But he also gives that shatter, which does the armor reduction, and if he manages to catch most people on the enemy team, that could be huge for really reducing the armor and helping the team out and to do more damage. Now, a lot of bruisers work for top. A lot of bruisers are typically AD. I mean, exceptions are stuff like Rumble and Vladimir, but Jarvan works top. You could have, I don't know, any AD bruiser top, I guess. And for the jungle,
Gangplank.
yeah, Gangplank, exactly. Like the Gangplank offers his Raise Morale, which can really help out his team. And I mean, you could also have, for example, Gangplank or Jarvan jungle too. And really, the jungler is who you're going to want the Zeke's Herald on, because Zeke's is such a good item that you want it as quickly as possible, but it's really more of a supporty item. So you want your jungler to get it. Your support could get it, but probably your support is going to get it too late for it to actually be any benefit. Or really, it's not going to be fast enough, as fast as you want it, basically. Your support can get that Aegis of Legion, which will help your team out and give that little bit of attack damage, and that helps out your entire team too. So a little bit more benefit from the Aegis of Legion. So those auras and that team synergy will, I think, help out your team a lot, and really help to negate some of the resistances and the actives from Randuin's Omen and Frozen Heart.
Right. And, a great thing about Zeke's is going to be about 600 gold cheaper than is Frozen Heart. So you should be able to get that a little bit earlier, because generally the opposing team's jungler may get that. I mean, not every team will get it, but it is a pretty, popular item right now. A lot of bruisers will run it, some APs will run it. Ryze in particular, of course, will run it, but some even, mana based APs will build Frozen Heart just because it has ridiculous cooldowns. Junglers will pick it up, so on and so forth. So it is a great item, but if you can get the Zeke's earlier than that, then you kind of have a window where suddenly you're giving 20% attack speed, 12% lifesteal to your entire team, and they're not bringing to the table that 20% attack speed slow that Frozen Heart gives you yet. And then as it gets into the later game, your team can build towards those last whispers like they generally would. But if you put together a team that has a lot of synergy, is going to give you a lot of attack speed bonuses, well then maybe you don't need to complete your Zeal into a Phantom Dancer. Maybe you just, keep the Zeal, rely on the attack speed coming from the bonus from your teams and build an earlier last whisper. So even if they do happen to, focus on that armor, and you notice that they're focusing on armor, then you build, penetration very early on. And one thing we haven't really talked about is who we would run in middle. And kind of when I brought this idea up, I think I brought it up to you, Brian, I was kind of thinking, multiple AD carries on the team, as opposed to, a lot of AD bruisers and some ADs and just no magic damage. So, I mean, I kind of would like to see an AD carry go middle. And we were previously talking how a lot of AD carries, they need support to really get farmed up. But there's a couple of them that actually do pretty well against AP carries. You still have to be worried about AP carries burst at level 6, but Caitlyn, for instance, does pretty well. Sivir, because of the spell shield, does pretty well, and Ezreal can also win in the middle lane matchup. Graves can also probably do pretty well. I just haven't seen that one as frequently. And he actually came into the game after that meta was over with, whereas previously anyone who wanted a solo would go middle. There wasn't really any set people that would go middle. Generally, the AD carry actually did go middle. So I've seen Caitlyn do it. I've seen Corki do it. I've seen a lot of other AD carries do it, and they do all right. You still, as I mentioned, have to be worried about that AP burst. And one thing this team is probably giving up is that AP burst. So you're going to have to be concerned about that in team fights. You're not going to get people immediately low, but you're probably going to have to kite a little bit, have extended battles, and really allow your AD carries to put out that consistent damage.
Yeah, and I just want to say we're not sacrificing any lane presence by having an all AD team. You can send AD champions that are really good at mid to mid. It's not like we're forcing them to a position they're not really good at. So their lane. In lane, they will still be really good. And yeah, again, you're missing some of the burst, but there are AD champions who do have a lot of burst. For example, you might want to run an AD caster, for example, like Talon. So maybe like a Talon mid, and that's been done, against certain champions, so that you have good AD damage, but you also have some burst. And you can really work with this a little bit. I personally like doing something like an Ezreal mid, AD Ezreal mid, and a Sivir bot lane as the AD carry with like a Taric support. And those are good lanes. You have an Ezreal mid who it does well. He still has that burst. He has the escape. And really, you see Ezreal, AP Ezreal mid too, so it's really no different from that at the very beginning. And you have your regular bruiser top and you have your jungler, so really not much is different in the laning phase. It's just in the team fights, you're trying to use your team composition in a way that's a little bit different from others.
Right, and you're trying to use it in an advantageous way to you, where you can focus all your items in a particular fashion and hope that they don't get items to counteract you fast enough, or hope said items don't counteract you enough. Because, of course, yes, they might pick up that Frozen Heart and that Randuin's. That's really going to slow you down, but that's always going to slow down AD carries and AD bruisers and AD champions. And that's an issue that you always have. But one thing that's kind of occurred to me over the course of time is, the bruisers, they're building, armor and health and whatnot, but even if they are focusing more towards armor, which a lot of them tend to do because they tend to have more top lane matchups that are armor based, then the AP carry still isn't the one that's killing them in team fights. Still, you need that consistent damage from the AD carry. Yes, the AP carry might be able to get them low, but they don't really have enough burst to actually finish off said bruisers. So you're still kind of in a similar situation as you would be. And people will complain. I can imagine people always cry about unorthodox team compositions. So they'll be like, oh, we don't have any AP damage. But when you think about it, why do you really need the magic damage? Yes, it's really nice to burst down people, but as Brian mentioned, you can have a Talon that can burst down people just as well. And really, the people that you want to burst down tend not to build armor until later on. And if they do build armor earlier on, then you don't need to focus them down quite as much because they're not going to be doing as much damage back to you.
Yep. So, and against certain teams, it really works pretty well. So, for example, let's say the enemy team runs a Morgana mid. If you have an AD mid, that really nullifies some of the things, and really a lot of AD mids can counter the Morgana, so that can work out well for you, or even a Kassadin. So stuff like that. If they have something like a Rammus, you might be a little bit worried. But that's what bans are for. You probably want to ban out a Malphite. You might want to ban out Rammus, depending. But there are certain champions that you're going to be good against, and certain champions you're not going to be very good against. But it's somewhat. I guess I don't want to say somewhat situational. There are team compositions that are going to do well against this team, but it is, I believe, pretty viable because of all the benefits that you can give to the entire team that can counteract the items that they buy. So, and that's the all AD team. Sotere mentioned an all AP team, and I think we're going to talk about that in a future show. It's a similar idea, but it's I don't know. I think there's a little bit of difference because you really don't have Or I guess we can talk about it now if you want, if you think we can cover it really quickly.
I think it warrants being talked about more in depth because I actually
Okay.
like the idea. I've seen it work before, so
Yeah.
let's save it for the next time. And I mean, I think we talked people's ears off quite enough, and we're gonna actually have to try this one out because a lot of our suggestions, our weird laning suggestions, we've actually had time to test it out, but we did not have time to test out this. I've run teams like this, and it kind of occurred to me because I had a team that had like 4 attack damage carries on it, but then the other team dodged, and I was like, oh, I was sure someone from my own team was going to dodge, but the other team dodged. Probably they just had a troll on their team, so they wanted to get away from that. But then I was like, wait, actually, maybe our team wasn't going to be that bad. Like, we had people who could go into every single lane and be decent. So that's kind of where the thought sprung from. And, we'll bring it back to you guys next week. And we'll talk a little bit about the all-AP team. Maybe that will be our main focus. Maybe not. Maybe we'll come up with something better.
Yeah, and I just want to say as a final note, I'm pretty sure everyone has had a game where, because of some trolls or something, you ended up with an all-AD team, and you actually surprisingly won. So, I mean, these things happen, and it's just that people are not used to having an all-AD team or an all-AP team, but if you think about it, if you look at what everyone can do, these kinds of teams can work if you work with it correctly. So just want to mention that as our final note. And I think that sums it up for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. Sorry for the 2-week delay. I think it was 2 weeks that we had.
What?
But yeah, that was actually. Oh, I didn't even show the little picture I had prepared of Zeke's. There's Zeke's.
Zeke's! Yes! Best item ever! Zeke's is a really good item. I mean, whenever I'm jungle or support, I'm always like, okay, one of us gets Aegis, one of us rushes Zeke's, because they're really, really great items for those team fights. So do keep that in mind. And besides that, Brian's going to give you his personal email so you can send in questions or comments or ask him out on a date.
Yep.
So how can they reach you, Brian?
Well, if you want to send in some questions for this Meta Musings, just send it to ZeroCardinality, it's just my name, at Gmail. And just put something like Meta Musings questions in the title, and we'll see if we can get to those questions in a future show. So yeah, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a good night.
Good night.